that, and want to say thank you to the Circular Innovation Council for the opportunity to speak today. It's something I'm excited to speak about. And maybe if we can queue up the presentation, and I'll just start to jump right into that. Just while that's being queued up, just want to reinforce a couple elements that, when we talk about circular procurement, we talk about reuse and sharing and repair and refurbishing, remanufacturing, as elements of our focus on procurement. Today, we're talking about foods, and, yes, foods are consumable, but when we look at the food supply chain as a whole, there are many elements, if not most elements of the circular procurement that we cover off on there. Certainly when we take a look at repurposing, less waste, sharing, reuse, composting, these are all core elements of that. Next slide. So really interested to see some of the parallels with the previous presentation, because I do want to speak briefly a little bit about policy. When those that work in procurement, especially in public procurement, policy procedures, I'll just generalize and call them the rules, really substantially guide and direct what we can do and what we can't do. And specific to foods, here in the province of Ontario, we have our provincial government, who through the Local Food Act have said that we want you to support and utilize local foods. Here in Thunder Bay in Northwestern Ontario, we have something called the Thunder Bay Food Charter. And here our council has said, we want to endorse and incorporate local, sustainable, environmentally friendly elements of our food supply chain and food security, and respectful inclusion of, in our particular area, Indigenous foods within our food supply chain. So it ultimately, policy and legislation drives process. Those procurement practitioners that are online here, as professionals, the fun that we have is taking the big picture, taking these legislations, taking these policies, taking these warm and fuzzy statements, and converting them into practical and realistic practices that we can actually move forward and strive to achieve some traction. Next slide. So many people that are in the municipal area, but if you're not in the municipal area, you wonder about where, why is a municipality involved in the procurement of foods? In our particular municipality, as in many municipalities, under the Long-Term Care Act, you're required to, under the Municipal Act, many are required to operate a long-term care home. We have one called Pioneer Ridge. But most municipalities also have stadium arenas. We have a 55+ center that supports both lunches and dinners. We operate many daycare centers. We have an after meal school program for children. And we also operate on behalf of the community, the Meals on Wheels program, which is quite a large food producer as well. So in total, our municipal food spend is quite large, considering the size of our organization, and very diverse in who we're procuring food on behalf of. Next slide. But I'd throw out at the very beginning successes on behalf of the municipality of the city of Thunder Bay. Put it out there. What have we been able to do? So our government says, hey, support local foods. Our council says, hey, support local foods and build in food security into our food supply chain. So what have we done? Probably back in 2012, 2013, really started to pay attention to food as a commodity. Like many procurement professionals, I buy roads, I buy bridges, we buy body armor, we buy transit vehicles, but we also buy food. So we stepped back and started to look at food as a commodity, and then started to implement some change. So here it puts it out there. Our local food spend, when we first started to track the data, we estimated in 2014 was in the range of 15%. And for the last couple of years, we've been playing in the range of, say, 30 to 35%. A little bit of a dip in 2020. Clearly, it was an impact of COVID. Both myself and my procurement team were so dedicated to the Wild West of procurement on pandemic PPE. Other elements of our focus had to be set aside. But we anticipate 2021, 2022 being another strong years. Now, what we were able to do is slice and dice our data, because when I started our foods, our deep dive into local and regional foods, there was no data. We had no idea what it was that we were doing. And as a procurement or supply professional, one of the things that we need to do is to capture data. And so that's what we began in 2015. So the bottom number there, the bottom shaded area is local foods that we buy within the region of Northwestern Ontario. And the top section of the columns are province of Ontario. So within the province of Ontario, when the province defines local food, local meaning the province of Ontario, our city council says, okay, that's the province, but tell us what you're buying locally. So we're able to slice and dice that by supplier, by geographic location, and we've done a deep dive into our data there. So our range is in the 30 to 35% of local food spend. We're finding resistance now at that mid 30 levels. To be honest, we're having difficulty finding more local foods that are available at institutional volumes. So there is a bit of an upper challenge that we're having difficulty trying to break through. Total food spend on behalf of the corporation is about $1.1 million. So, I mean, it's a nice sized chunk of money. And for those that are, enjoy playing with money and know about economic development, at 30% at $1 million, that's $300,000 that's reinvested back into our region, in our province, in local foods. And certainly, could you imagine if the broader public sectors within all of Ontario did that? It would just be an amazing achievement, an amazing boom for agriculture in our province. Next slide. So to go from our estimated 15% into the mid 30 range, how did we deal with it? I was asked to speak briefly about challenges and barriers. The first phase I've called the fact or fiction stage, where my background is supply management. I'm a procurement professional from training. Food is one of the commodities that we're responsible for. So when I started to delve into this area, I was told a lot of things that you can't do. And I'll just call these speed bumps or barriers, resistance to change. We're all familiar with these. So I was trying to find out, what was fact, what was fiction. And that was a very onerous stage and somewhat painful. And today, with the amount of information out there, in the sharing of information, we're hoping that we can blow through many of these resistance. But what is out there is lack of information and lack of data. I threw out my numbers that we're able to achieve, but how do we stack up? We just heard from down in Brazil. They've got some great successes there. But to this day, there remains a lack of information and lack of meaningful data in the food area. Also, there is a lack of education and training for those supply professionals that have done the PMAC or Supply Chain Canada courses. I taught them for 25 years. There is no conversation about food as a commodity. So we're coming out as supply professionals with little or no awareness of food and certainly the impact of local foods as well. And when I did our deeper dive, I also found that there was ineffective or or procurement tools that we have in our holster of traditional procurement tools that really aren't as effective for procuring local foods. So those were some difficulties and barriers that we had to overcome. An element for those procurement people that are online today, within public procurement in Canada, I suspect internationally, we all have rules. And what you need to do is to really do that deep dive to know what the rules say. Because the way I look at it is the rules define a sandbox of opportunity to play with it. Some of them are hard. Some have $100,000 thresholds. Certainly international trade agreements have hard thresholds. But aside from those larger thresholds, there is so much play opportunity or sandbox of where you can make in at a frontline practitioner to make a difference. Next slide. So a little highlight here. These are actual pictures here. On the left-hand side, we have a local farm that is growing product for us, and signage out there that there's our food, and we have some of our peer supports there. We have a resident out on that outing as well. Bottom slide, middle bottom is a photo I took 2 weeks ago on a farm tour. And on the right-hand side, these are fishes that are being harvested by Indigenous harvesters on behalf of the city of Thunder Bay, and we convert them into our foods. Next slide. So I want to just talk briefly about how do you get started. As I mentioned, food wasn't my background. I didn't have specific training in food. So how do you get started? And my very first strong recommendation is get out and meet a farmer, stand in their fields, listen and share information, have conversations. The photos that are shown here are photos that I took of my team meeting farmers 2 weeks ago. We did 5 farm tours. We have 3 more planned. I've got my buying team there. I've got a cook there. I've got my manager of nutrition and food services there. Get to know your farmer. Listen to them. Share information. They really don't know a lot about institutional players. And when you have that conversation, amazing opportunity opens up. And as I've highlighted here in the middle, you've got to get out of your office. Think back to your school days when you went on field trips and how much fun they were. It is an amazing activity if you can take an afternoon or a few afternoons to get out, meet your local growers, have conversations, and you'll find that opportunity opens up. Next slide. So here's an example of a plated meal. It's a photo taken of one of the meals that we serve our residents in our long-term care home. A couple slides before I showed the whitefish that was being harvested by the Indigenous harvesters. That's a baked piece of whitefish. We have local greens from a greenhouse, local onions, local strawberries. That's an actual plated plate of substantially local foods that we serve to our residents at our long-term care home. Next slide. It was brought up, Joanne earlier spoke about the amount of waste in food, the food supply chain as a total. Absolutely true. One of the first deeper dives that we did is how do you manage something when you don't have data? So we undertook a very comprehensive food waste audit, and it's a very large report that we prepared, but I grabbed just this one slide here as an illustration. So for example, plate waste and service rate waste represents just over 80%, the classic 80-20 rule. But think about that. When you know that 80% of your food waste is generated from plate or serving, what a great nugget. What a great area now that you know that to do your deeper dive to start to reduce food waste and to save monies. And when you look at the food packaging, we've converted in many cases from our regional growers to returnable containers. For those that buy oils and other food-related products in large pails, we have a lineup for pails. Much of our food packaging now is either going into recycling or repurposing. An area that was a bit of a surprise to me, I suppose, not being a foodie, was the waste reduction that we incurred when we shifted to local foods. So for example, hydroponic grown lettuce has a less than 5% wastage, and it's essentially just the roots on the bottom. But when we buy broadline distributed lettuce from the big broadline companies, lettuce waste is up to 20%. So there's savings there, savings either in monies or savings in waste just by buying good food that requires less wastage. And then ultimately, if whoever is eating the food, enjoys the taste of the food, they're going to eat it. And that directly attributes to reduction on plate waste as well. Next slide. Success drivers. As I spoke about, learn the areas of play, learn what the rules of the sandbox is that you can play within local and regional foods. We're achieving, in the range of 35%. There's more room for us to play, and this is all within the broader public sector procurement rules here in the province of Ontario. Reach out and build partnerships. Ministry of Agriculture, your local food associations, Nourish is a national organization. Reach out, ask questions, build partnerships. Learn from successes and failures. You're going to have, especially at the early stage, some amazing, fast, early home runs, or the low-hanging fruit, as they say. But you will have some failures, and some of the failures will be surprises. Many of us have the authority. When you look at our job descriptions as managers, directors, supervisors, you have the authority to make decisions. Do it. Use it. It's there for you. Use the right procurement tools. There is the use of negotiations. I'll speak briefly about a tool that I've modified in terms of forward contracting. Foster and support food champions. There is going to be somebody within your organization. It may be a cook. It may be somebody that just enjoys local foods, and grab that person, support them, and let them run. Another area of success drivers is in the various areas in the province of Ontario and Canada. We have seasonality. We have freeze up happening, and fresh produce is being wrapped up. So incorporate seasonality, shift your menus. These are major areas to take advantage of local and regional foods. Next slide. As I mentioned, there's many partners within your area. You have community economic development departments. Province of Ontario, we have Ministry of Agriculture. If you're in Southern Ontario, you may be very familiar with Greenbelt. Nourish is a national organization advancing healthy, sustainable, and culturally appropriate foods within healthcare across Canada. Reach out. There's many organizations, and there will be some within your area. Next slide. Talk about success and failures. We took our residents out to that local farm that was growing foods for us, that had the sign. The residents had an amazing time. They got to meet the farmer. They got to pick some product. It was an amazing win-win-win day. But in terms of failures, don't drive your school bus out into the farm field. We literally got stuck and had to have a tractor tow us off. But even though that was a failure, that story is still told to this day. So enjoy it, have fun. There's amazing things that can do, and go out and get stuck, get your boots muddy, just really enjoy the experience. Next slide. So there are procurement tools out there. On the bottom left, I'll spend just a brief minute or two just chatting about that. How do you have a farmer grow a field of crops for you? When I stood in the field, they said, hey, it takes me 6 months to grow that for you. How do I know you're going to be there to buy the product when I plant these 10,000 pounds of carrots for you? And they said that they've been burned before. So I used a procurement tool that we use in the energy business forward contracting. We forward buy for energy, electricity, and natural gas. Why not forward buy for foods? Simply modified that and can make available through the council this tool for you to use. And there are other tools. The broader public sector procurement directive helps define what you can and can't do within Ontario's public procurement. Next slide. Next slide. So wanted to just highlight some newer trends. You know, we've had good success to very good success on local foods, but really been intrigued in advancing partnerships and relationships with Indigenous foods. And so we started a deep dive into incorporating Indigenous foods within our food supply chain. And like anything, you know, where do you start and capture data? So here, you know, it's relatively recent. We started, these are our numbers, we track our numbers, and we are reaching out now and buying foods from Indigenous harvesters directly. We've just entered into a forward buy contract for fish, and 80% of the fish will be harvested by Indigenous harvesters. Just amazing success stories. And in 2021, we anticipate some very good successes continuing to expand this. Next slide. We earlier heard about the importance of environmental, social. We've taken this to a further degree as well. And I was looking at Indigenous foods, and I expanded it, you know, because the full supply chain is under my portfolio. Why are we just looking at food? So what we've expanded now is that 10% of our RFP award criteria is related to environmental and social stewardship, and also diversity and inclusion. So we're saying we want to incorporate this, and we're putting it out there. 10% of our total award points fall in these criteria, and we're actually seeing a difference. For those procurement professionals, you know that there's generally a grouping of very strong suppliers, you know, that represent the top scoring points. But now that 10% is making a difference of award decisions. So it's so cool to see this when we put it out there. Next slide. I won't get into reading this. This slideshow can be available, but what we do is we give a bit more detail. You know, we say that we're essentially committed to procuring goods and services that take into account all of the right elements related to sustainable environmental and social initiatives. So we paint this picture, and then we reward points for this. And earlier, Dave Casper spoke about you know, incorporating points for recycled contents. This is absolutely aligned with what he was saying. And Dave, I don't know if you're still online, but you talked about you know, fighting the stupid battles, and I appreciate that. I still chuckle over that. And there are stupid battles related to food, buying food, because it really is the right thing to do. And why do you have to have sometimes these stupid battles to do the right thing? Next slide. And the same thing for diversity and inclusion is we said it's the city's intent to conduct business which firms demonstrate a commitment towards diversity and inclusion within its business practices, workforce, and their supply partners. And this is a newer area for us, and we're rewarding points for those that are stepping out and making a difference in this area. Next slide. So, you know, in total, local and healthy foods can be done. You've got national policy. You heard about Brazil. Ontario, we have legislation and acts in place. And many of you have regional food security charters in place. Step forward, take control. You can do it. The tools are there. The public procurement rules allow you to do it. Throw on a pair of boots, go stand in a farmer's field and enjoy the experience and have fun. Take control of your supply chain, especially your food supply chain, and just do it. And I dare you to do it. And I challenge you to try and beat our numbers. Thank you.